Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. Did you guys know that today, October 20th, is Corporate Gossip's first birthday? We released our first episode a year ago. I can't believe it. If you want to celebrate with us, log off early today. You deserve it. Enjoy the day. And then when you're done with that, go follow us on Instagram. Instagram's where I go to be totally unhinged, and you should follow us there. I post pictures from the episode, and you can chat in the comments. It's a fun place. Check us out. Okay, before we get started, you already know my favorite thing, shouting out all the people who bought us coffees this week. We have Sarah B, Bjorg Maria, Daniela C, at Evan PHX, and Darcy. Thank you all so much. Your support makes this podcast possible. Okay, here's the show. Welcome to Lake Placid. It's fucking freezing. It's beautiful, of course, with the socked-in peaks of the Adirondack Mountains, the village streets lined with snowbanks, and the roofs of the quaint souvenir shops filled with tchotchkes from the 1980 Winter Olympics are covered in glistening icicles. But the wind chill will take your breath away. On this late March 2015 evening, it's -9 degrees Fahrenheit. But for McKinsey senior partners Arnie Gatak and Martin Elling, who are 25 feet beneath the frozen ground in the wine cellar of the Lake Placid Lodge, the temperature is an optimum 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Beneath the copper chandeliers, Gatak and Elling are flanked on both sides of the 13-foot solid wood dining table by their McKinsey associates and representatives from their client's executive committee. They had gathered in New York's North Country for 3 days for a business strategy refresh, according to documents. While drinking from a collection of rare vintages, the group of Ivy League bosses would strategize, optimize, reorganize, and ideate to their heart's content. Locked away in the lodge's business center from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day, Mr. Gatak would lead his McKinsey consultants, guiding their clients through exercises to think of new ways to get their products in the hands of customers. Then, the executives would enjoy a 2.7-mile group jog around picturesque Mirror Lake before a private dinner and cocktails, where they returned to their business challenge, boosting sales of Purdue Pharma's profitable painkiller, OxyContin. By 2015, public fear over the devastating impact of the opioid painkiller were reaching a fever pitch. Patients, many of whom had no prior history of addiction, were becoming dependent on the pills and subsequently on heroin and then fentanyl. That year, about 35,000 Americans would die of opioid overdoses. One of them was Jessie Call, who lived 9 miles west of the lodge in Saranac Lake, a 26-year-old mother of 2 who had aspired to be a nurse. She died of a fentanyl overdose and was found by her mother the next morning. Her neighbor, Marine veteran Justin Ropke, had just completed a rehab program nearby. He became addicted to opioids after sustaining injuries in Afghanistan and Iraq. A talented musician and baseball player, Justin would relapse and pass away of a heroin overdose a month later. It doesn't take a Wharton MBA to know that death is bad for business, so the Sackler family, Purdue's billionaire owners, hired McKinsey to come up with a new plan to turbocharge OxyContin sales. McKinsey's strategy to drive profits for the drug maker were cynical and disturbing. One proposal included providing a rebate of $14,810 to pharmacies for every overdose attributable to the pills they sold. During the Lake Placid retreat, the team would even brainstorm new marketing strategies for younger patients. How might Disney enter the pain management market? One slide read. After, they'd brainstorm how to counter the emotional messages from mothers with teenagers that overdosed. The ideas generated in that conference room would be lethal for Americans like Jessie and Justin. In the years following, Gatak, Elling, and their teams would consult with other opioid manufacturers to implement an opioid sales force blitz. They'd consult with the FDA and HHS Secretary Alex Azar, who was responsible for opioid regulation, an obvious and dangerous conflict of interest. How is it possible that despite all of the media attention around America's opioid epidemic, no one knew that McKinsey was so deeply involved? 3 letters, NDA. A. The firm operates in secret. Since its founding in 1926 by James McKinsey and Martin Bauer, it has kept secret its clients and the advice it gives them, which meant Gittak and Elling had nothing to worry about. Even if Purdue was implicated or sued, no one would be able to trace the ideas back to them. Right? Right, guys? Just in case, in 2018, when Massachusetts filed a lawsuit against Purdue, accusing the company and the Sackler family of widespread fraud and deception in the marketing of opioids, Martin Elling sent an email to Arnie Gittak.
It probably makes sense to have a quick conversation with the risk committee to see if we should be doing anything other than eliminating all our documents and emails. Suspect not, but if things get tougher there, someone might turn to us.
Arnie replied,
"Thanks for the heads up. Will do."
An editor's note for all you business boys interested in getting into the fraud space: don't talk about deleting incriminating emails via email, you bozos. Amateur hour. In 2020, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to criminal charges that it misled the federal government about sales of its painkiller OxyContin. In 2022, Purdue reached a bankruptcy settlement with thousands of addiction victims, state governments, and municipalities for $6 billion. The settlement, which would shield members of the Sackler family from future opioid-related liabilities, was appealed by the federal government in 2023. Representatives of the Justice Department say that approving the settlement would leave in place a roadmap for wealthy corporations and individuals who are not in financial distress to misuse the bankruptcy system to avoid mass liability. As part of the 2020 criminal case, hundreds of McKinsey emails and PowerPoints, which we'll discuss on this episode, were released to the public. The documents paint a damning picture of McKinsey's misconduct, and the firm reached a $600 million settlement with 49 state attorneys general. States will use the penalties for opioid treatment, prevention, and recovery programs. As part of the settlement, McKinsey would not admit criminal wrongdoing. Both Gittak and Elling were fired but have faced no legal consequences. The Purdue case placed a magnifying glass on the prestigious firm, and recent reports have exposed McKinsey at the nucleus of a number of business scandals. In 2008, when securitized loans were poisoning the financial system, McKinsey was there promoting the practice. In 2017, as President Trump looked for ways to clamp down on the southern border, McKinsey was there, promising that the administrator would save money by cutting the budget for food and medical care for migrants and shortcutting due process. They've been involved in scandals at Rikers Island, in corrupt South African government, and implicated in a bread price-fixing cover-up in Canada, and that's just to name a few. When it comes to systemic corporate malfeasance, McKinsey isn't the one who lit the match, but they're often found fanning the flames. This is the Corporate Gossip Podcast. McKinsey, this is why we can't have nice things.
Welcome back to the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, CPA Scorn, Becca Platsky, and I'm here with
data analytics playboy, Adam Platsky.
My brother, and I also have a very special guest for you guys. One of my bestest buddies. He is one of the preeminent gossipers of our time. His name is Lawrence Humphrey. He's here with us from Austin, Texas, all the way. You know, they say that if you're more than 300 miles away, people think you're an expert.
Really?
Yeah, and you are an expert.
They flew me out here.
Yeah.
To provide gossiping expertise.
That's right. And Lawrence also is a CEO of a company called Pearl, which is a really interesting way to think about consulting. It's almost like a crowd-sourced consulting company, and it's amazing. And he has done so many amazing things, and I'm super excited for you guys to meet him. Lawrence, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for hosting me. Lawrence Humphrey, and like you said, founder, CEO of Pearl, a platform connecting employers with diverse job seekers. And like you said, in a sense, it's kind of a crowdsourced way where everyone has some practice or some leadership that they can share with others, and they have deep expertise. Why not use that to get you a job or your next opportunity?
Yeah.
And you can find more about it at pearl.us.com. We're on the internet at getpearl, _ on Instagram. I'm sure all the links will be online.
We'll put them all in our bio.
Perfect.
So are we ready to get into it? Get into our first piece of corporate gossip?
Let's do it. Big nuanced energy. Let's go.
Let's go. So, McKinsey, this is why we can't have nice things. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see Don Cheadle in his role in the show House of Lies, which is it's almost like the precursor to Succession, but it's a funny show about management consulting. And in this clip here, he's saying, go murder. If it's making money, then murder. And that really, I think, encapsulates a lot of McKinsey's vibes throughout their over 100-year history. If it's making money, then go murder. There's two other firms that make up like the upper echelon of management consulting. That includes MBB, so it's McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group. When I was doing management consulting, and Lawrence, you have experience there too. I mean, it was the place. It was the place where the best and the brightest were working. It's kind of like what you pegged all other work against. If you beat out McKinsey for a pitch, like that was a huge deal. And, in some instances, I'm sure there are some ethical, stable geniuses that do work for McKinsey. I'm also certain if I applied for a job at McKinsey right now, I wouldn't make it past the HR screener. So, they're not taking accounting majors from state schools, but that's their problem. And you can be a consultant in literally any industry. Like, I remember the first minutes, it felt like, of COVID, all of a sudden these consulting companies are coming out of the woodwork being like, we can teach you how to do a hybrid workforce. We can teach you how to test your employees for COVID. And it's like, how could you possibly know? It literally just happened.
And I remember specifically like what one of the founding moments or like founding emotions of Tech Can Do Better was McKinsey saying, we are the leaders of racial equity. And I'm like, when? Since when? Like I'm looking at y'all's website. I'm not seeing many of me's in there.
But you stamp a McKinsey seal on it, and they must be right. I think the pull of getting into management consulting is getting the inside view into all these different businesses, and it's a really easy way as like a 25-year-old to kind of get like a fast track into management, because once you have that on your resume, you're good to go.
You know what's crazy? I went through my job application process that I've gone through, and I'm on fun employment right now. So just want to get that out there. But what I noticed is a lot of mid-senior level positions are always looking for management consulting experience or top 25 B school. So that feels like a big jump for your career trajectory by joining McKinsey, joining Bain, right? It gives you 2 years in, really hard work, but then you're set up to be senior level and cutting out, 5 years of your career, 5 years of hard work?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about that, but our listeners can probably guess what ends up happening. So if the executive ranks are being populated by people who work at McKinsey, and the only people who work at McKinsey are going to Harvard, and the majority of the people that are in Harvard are white, rich men.
Literally 1%ers or children of 1%ers.
Right. So, and we're going to kind of come back to that towards the end of the podcast episode here, but there are a number of systemic issues. You did some testing when you were at a bachelor party in Vegas, right?
Yeah, so I went to Vegas for this specific reason, but I think a lot of people within business know who McKinsey is, but I think outside of the business world, not many people know who McKinsey was. So I did some testing, some A/B testing on how impressive.
Rigorous, double blind.
Yeah, very rigorous. I went to Encore Beach Club and told a set of people that I worked at McKinsey and a set of people that I worked at my current job.
And another set that you were a bank teller.
And another set that I was a roofer as a control.
A control.
And more people were impressed with my current job than McKinsey. When I told people of the opposite sex that I worked at McKinsey, they were not impressed. And I think it's just telling. Like,
Adam, your former job was a very popular retail clothing brand.
Yeah, very popular retail clothing brand that does a lot of marketing that most people know. It's an everyday name.
But people in business would think that McKinsey would be much more impressive. But it just doesn't translate.
Right, but it just doesn't translate.
So that's the thing. McKinsey is everywhere. Mm-hmm. And you're thinking, why the hell don't I know of this company? If it's everywhere, it touches. They've been around for 100 years. Their revenues are $10 billion annually. They have 30,000 employees. And some of their employees become celebrities in their own right. I'm going to rattle through a list. These are all former McKinsey consultants. Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook. James Gorman, the CEO of Morgan Stanley. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Microsoft, Julian Day, former CEO of Kmart and Radio Shack, Chelsea Clinton, Yul Kwan, winner of Survivor Cook Island.
Yeah, that's really important. I think that speaks to McKinsey. I think that speaks to McKinsey. Yeah, the resourcefulness of a McKinsey person. My girlfriend's a huge Survivor fan, and she was like, oh yeah, that guy, he was really smart.
Oh, great.
It takes a lot to win Survivor. As somebody who just got back into watching Survivor, there's a lot of game to be played. I think it speaks to the level of person.
Sure. In addition, the CEOs or chairmen of the following companies are McKinsey alumni: Allianz, the College Board, Vodafone, Rolls-Royce, Citigroup, HSBC, Levi Strauss, Foot Locker, Best Buy, Lego, BMW, DoorDash. And interestingly, some of the people that we've talked about on this podcast have worked at McKinsey, including Carlos Watson, the disgraced founder of Aussie Media, who was arrested this year for fraud, Jeff Skilling, former CEO of Enron, who was sentenced to 24 years in prison for fraud, Jim McNerney, CEO of Boeing, who should be in prison for his role in the 737 MAX scandal, which resulted in over 300 passenger deaths. And Caroline Ghosn, she's the daughter of former Nissan CEO Carlos Ghosn. He's a fugitive in Japan, and we're going to talk about him in a future episode. And PDB, Pete Buttigieg. He's the Secretary of Transportation and former U.S. presidential candidate. McKinsey has advised the Vatican, NASA, virtually every pharmaceutical company and their regulators. We're going to get into that in this episode. Insurance companies, U.S. Immigration Enforcement, also known as ICE, 22 of China's largest state-owned enterprises, governments in Russia, South Africa, Malaysia, railroad companies, tech companies, museums, weapons makers, casinos, bookmakers, sports teams, any company with a dollar to spare. They work with 90% of the Fortune 100. And how many of those people at Vanderpump Paris had no idea what the hell McKinsey was?
That's right. None of them.
All of those people that you met at the beach club in Vegas are being impacted by McKinsey
every day.
And they have no idea.
Pulled, if you will.
Yeah.
And they even do a ton of work in the government. You were talking about Mitt Romney, right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Mitt Romney, who famously came from Bain and then started his political career. He's got this famous quote when he was running for president. The Republican candidate, once a consultant himself, was asked if he would reduce the size of the government. Quote, so I would have, at least some structure that McKinsey would guide me to put in place, Mitt Romney told the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. When his audience seemed surprised, he added, I'm not kidding. I would probably bring in McKinsey.
So how many of these Republicans are like smaller government, less spending, but also we're going to pay McKinsey $100 million to tell us how to do it?
I have in a lot of these stories the fees that McKinsey collected and eventually had to repay in many cases, but the fees are just insane.
It's because there's a market. They set their own market.
Yep.
I mean, they are truly unique in the services they provide, or at least that's what they make you think.
It's just like we are hiring McKinsey for the allure of McKinsey.
Exactly. Well, and it gives us some credibility. So if I'm a CEO and I want to make a decision, good or bad, if I bring in McKinsey and maybe it's because I paid them to say this, but they say that my idea is a good one, then I'm good to go. So my question is, if this company is so big and so pervasive, why have you never heard of it? The reason is they are incredibly secretive. Every single one of their consultants signs an NDA. When Pete Buttigieg was running for president and people were asking him, like, can you share what clients you were working with? Because I'd like to know if there's a conflict of interest there. He needed special dispensation to reveal 2 of his clients during his presidential campaign.
That was one of Marvin Bower's key things was don't talk about client affairs with anyone. They also keep secret who they're working with, and they want the companies not to tell people that they're working with McKinsey. That was at least the original goal.
Yeah, and speaking of Marvin Bower, I was at my local public library, and off the shelf I see a book by Marvin Bower, McKinsey, coincidentally with this. And on the first page, written and privately printed for readership by only the personnel of McKinsey.
Wow.
Wow.
That's crazy. Do you think legally
Don't hunt me down. I'm sorry,
we found
McKinsey,
it. It was
but
public property.
I didn't read it, of course, McKinsey. I have it here for prop's sake, but I didn't read anything in the book other than the first page.
That's so interesting.
put it
Did
down.
you
Once
end
you
up
got to the
reading
first
it?
Yeah, I got to the first page and I put it down respectfully. I want to go return it to the company headquarters. Yeah, it was a really interesting book. And honestly, it wasn't until, and maybe we can talk about this later, his perspective on recruiting that I was like, whoa.
They had an interesting trick that they used to make it seem like they were a lot more selective than
What's
they
that?
actually were. Well, I'll tell you in a little bit. I don't want to spoil anything.
Okay, no
so
spoilers.
the thing is, despite their, in the business world at least, sterling reputation, over the past even just 4 years, McKinsey has been under increased scrutiny. Let's go through a couple headlines. Number one, McKinsey will return $32 million in fees over disclosure failures, in which McKinsey was under investigation for failing to disclose conflicts of interest and failing to guard against insider trading involving companies they were advising.
So what do you think they collected on the? It says I think it's 15 million.
It's two different settlements, 32 million total.
Okay, so on
yeah.
that 30 million, what do you think McKinsey collected in fees?
Oh, total that they
Yeah.
probably 100 million.
They 72 million. So
So they returned 32 and they
they
pocketed
still
72.
profited. Yeah.
Dude.
And they didn't even have to admit any guilt or responsibility in that settlement.
Right. The crazy thing is, the DOJ said that basically we're giving you a clean slate for the last 20 years, but anything new that comes up, we're going to investigate. So be on your best behavior.
God. Okay, here's another headline. How McKinsey helped the Trump administration carry out its immigration policies, in which McKinsey proposed the administrator save money by cutting the budget for food and medical care for migrants and shortcutting due process to get migrants deported quicker. You know, the problem with due process, it's not good for business.
It's not very innovative. It's not cool.
No, it's not sexy.
It's not nothing sexy about due process. Kind of a drag. I didn't do a simple random sample, but I have to imagine kids are not loving due process nowadays.
Gen Z hates due process. They collected $20 million in fees from ICE. $20 million. Can you imagine? And for the advice of what? Cutting the food budget. Can you imagine how much, just from a humanitarian perspective, could be provided to these freaking asylum seekers for $20 million? Here's another headline. New York City paid McKinsey millions to stem jail violence. Instead, violence soared. We read that wrong. In which McKinsey reported bogus numbers and flailed in a project at Rikers Island. Today, assaults and other attacks there are up almost 50%.
Right. So as the analytics playboy, what they did here was they just manipulated the numbers to tell what the story that they wanted to. It's just funny to me, like how many of these consultants walked into Rikers actually?
With their Patagonia vests.
Yeah.
It was like, hey guys, I have some notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you got a little blood on my Allbirds.
So like, do you want to hear some example recommendations?
Yes, please.
Like increased use of aggressive dogs. Yeah.
Oh my God.
No, little angel dog.
More increased use of tasers and shotguns. So I'm guessing the prep was to watch Con Air.
I just want to see the slides. Being a
would
consultant,
kill to see the
like to see the
slides.
keynote,
Yeah.
like just a big picture of like a shotgun and
Yeah.
tasers. Like this is
Criminals
it,
are bad.
We figured it out. More violence. Okay, cool.
So one of the senior partners who worked on this ended up going to be CEO of Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. I don't know how that works.
Oh my God, that's so random. God, it really is true. You
Yeah.
can do anything.
The pipipeline, man. It doesn't matter what projects you're on.
doesn't
The
matter.
McKinsey pipeline is so strong.
Literally, you could sick dogs on people who are in. Remember, Rikers isn't a prison; it's a jail. So you could sick. Talk about hating due process. They're in jail. They haven't even been convicted.
Straight to dogs.
Straight to the dogs. Straight to the tasers.
What do you think the pitch was to the people at Louis Vuitton? They're like, I worked in the prison system, therefore I can help Louis Vuitton lock up more sales. Jesus.
No, their production facilities are very similar.
Oh my
to
God.
Rikers.
Yeah, they probably
It
use
works
prison
really
labor.
well, yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Moving on to the next headline, McKinsey charged in South African corruption case. This was work that the company completed advising the country's state-owned freight, rail, and port operator. This was the first time in McKinsey's 96-year history that the firm had faced criminal charges. This is like in the years post apartheid, there was a tremendous amount of corruption in South Africa's government as they're kind of going through like this reconstruction era. And McKinsey knew the risks. It was very obvious. And there's literal emails where they're like, this seems pretty risky, but that's a lot of money. And it's crazy. And so, yeah, they did face criminal charges. I know a number of people were fired. So, okay, you know, governments here and abroad are also embroiled in scandals related to McKinsey practically every year because they spend a crazy amount of taxpayer money on consultants who write public policy. So terrible on both ends. You don't want these guys writing your public policy. Then there's the scandals that we're going to dive into on this episode. So McKinsey's major role in the American opioid crisis. And of course, how they became the firm that built Enron. And if you talk to people who work or works at McKinsey and you press them, like, your firm has done a lot of bad shit. Like, what do you have to say to that? I think that Mayor Pete's interview on this subject is very enlightening. And I'm going to show it to you guys now and I'll play it as well. But this exemplifies, I think, the mindset of these consultants, in particular, those more well-known, where they have to defend their actions. Pete is talking about McKinsey's work consulting for a Canadian grocer who ended up in a bread price fixing scandal that McKinsey knew of.
You have been on the front lines of corporate downsizing. You've been on the front lines of corporate price fixing. You've been on the front lines of our misadventures.
I'm sorry,
of our misadventures in foreign policy. You've had direct experience of many of the things that make a lot of young people very angry about the way that this country is operating right now. You don't seem to embody that anger.
So the proposition that I've been on the front lines of corporate price fixing is just to get that out of the way.
You worked for a company that was fixing bread prices.
No, I worked for a consulting company that had a client that may have been involved in fixing, or was apparently in a scandal. I was not aware of the Canadian bread pricing scandal until last night.
I worked for a company.
I was associate to the regional manager.
Yeah. But they're able to have this like arm's length distance from any scandal that this company is involved in. Oh, I wasn't involved in a price fixing scandal. I worked for a company that consulted for another company that may or may not have been involved in a price fixing scandal.
Which I love the plausible deniability,
yes.
Just conceptually. Love to have it on my side, which McKinsey, I mean, they figured out how to, I was just telling the guy, I didn't know that.
It's super clean though, right? Because most people are like, oh, I don't really, consulting, I don't get it.
Yeah.
But okay, yeah, he's like 2 degrees separated, so that makes sense. Seems like a good guy.
The thing that's ironic, I mean, I guess it's not ironic. This is like what they call purpose washing, right? Where a company, even ExxonMobil, their purpose, their vision is going to be like, we want to make the world a good place for all of the sea lions, you know? This is McKinsey's purpose, right? And it's all corporate mumbo jumbo. It's complete bullshit, but it's got all these platitudes about how they're making the world a better place. We're accelerating for a more sustainable, inclusive, and growing future for all. And we'll talk more about the sketchiness that these consultants would be forced to justify. But a few quotes, these are from former McKinsey consultants. McKinsey employees are asked to participate in a values day organized by offices around the world. In 2019, the Australia managing partner, John Linden, spoke about how, at a minimum, McKinsey should not work with clients who harm or kill people.
Bare minimum.
Bare minimum.
Look,
y'all, table stakes. Go in there, first meeting. Do y'all kill people? Like, shoot straight with
How many bodies do you have on you?
Just before his death in 1968, the firm's chairman, Gilbert Klee, reflected on the importance of these values. He wrote, regardless of an individual's field of interest or what he wants to do with his life, I believe the firm offers 2 other great satisfactions. The ability to look yourself in the mirror every morning and to say, there's nothing I need to be ashamed of. If you said that to yourself, don't you think you'd be harboring a deep, dark secret.
I'm not going to say that's someone who is ashamed of themselves, but it certainly does have the characteristics of someone trying to talk themselves out of that.
We're
shame.
open to any armchair diagnosing you'd like to do.
I'll do plenty of that.
Okay. So, Adam, to your point, if actions speak louder than words, it's clear what McKinsey cares about. Ready? Say it with me. Shareholder value maximization. Their work over the past 9 years has made their clients and McKinsey partners very, very wealthy. And how do you think they've done that? Do you think it's through their ingenuity, their sharp thinking?
Fold.
Fold?
Yeah.
What's that?
Fraud, offshoring, layoffs, and downsizing.
No, wait, I was calling it old F.
I think fold is better.
Fold is better. Offshoring, layoff, downsizing, and fraud. It's becoming increasingly difficult for McKinsey to bullshit us. And some former consultants, luckily for us, are tossing NDAs to the wind and speaking out. So here's some of the former consultants who have not, this isn't just coming from Fishbowl. It's coming from some of these articles that have on The Economist. And obviously, of course, just a reminder, if you're looking for any of the links of the articles or the books that we're talking about in this episode, you can do so in the show notes. So one former consultant turned frequent critic, an author named Tom Peters, said, "The bigger problem is the disinvestment of people in favor of profits. I really think shareholder value maximization has done more harm than any single thing maybe in the country. It's nauseating. How do you do that and then pretend you're a values-driven company? How do you have a values day and then do that shit? Unbelievable." Another former employee says, "I couldn't come into work every day knowing I had worked my entire life. All of it was being used to make other people's lives worse." God, at least
they have nothing to be ashamed of. If I could tell them.
At least most corporate jobs, you kind of can say to yourself, like, I'm not making anybody's life better, but I'm also not making anybody's life worse. Oof.
The benefits of being a cog in the wheel sometimes.
Seriously. All right, you guys ready to take a break and we'll move on to our next?
Let's do it.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that commercial break and make sure you support our sponsors. So the next piece of corporate gossip is, if Jack Welch is Theresa Giudice, McKinsey is Juicy Joe, and today's billionaire boss boy is 4-year-old Melania. Do you get that reference, Lawrence?
Not even a little bit.
Okay.
I'm right there with you. I'm
a representative of all of your
I
other.
can explain it to you.
I have guidance.
Layman.
Oh, you have guidance.
Yeah, I have guidance. So just a disclaimer before we move to the next piece of corporate gossip. Most of the research for this episode came from 2 books. The first is The Firm by Duff McDonald, published in 2014. And the second is When McKinsey Comes to Town, which is a new book published by Michael Forsyth and Walt Bogdanich. For the record, McKinsey says that at least the latter book, quote unquote, fundamentally misrepresents our firm and our work. So back to the gossip. So in Housewives lore, we know that Theresa Giudice went away for her part in the bankruptcy fraud that was masterminded by her then husband, Juicy Joe. In the same way, while many of these companies are the head, McKinsey is the neck. And together they create the monster, a class of insufferable boss boys, aka Melania Giudice, saying, "Give me pizza, you old troll."
Melania.
Give me pizza, you old troll.
So how did this happen? Where did we go so wrong? Mike, can you go to the next slide? So here are the 2 founders of McKinsey. Well, on the left, we have the actual founder of McKinsey. On the right, we have kind of the soul of McKinsey. So James O. McKinsey founded the firm in 1926. Here's a funny quote. He says, "Never in my whole life before did I know how difficult it is to make business decisions myself, rather than merely advising others what to do." And that just cracks me up because it's just like, it's very indicative, or it's very emblematic of a 25-year-old who's flying around doing consulting when he has no idea what is actually going on. So in 1933, a man named Marvin Bower, who's the author of the book that Lawrence found in the library, joined the firm. He's seen as the firm's spiritual leader, and he really does create a lot of the like consulting ease that we still use today. McKinsey is a firm, not a company. It runs a practice, not a business. Consultants work on engagements, not jobs. So this is like starting that elite language.
Yeah, so you know some of the principles that Bauer created?
No.
In 1937, up and out.
In 1937.
Up and out. So some of the other principles, do you want to speak
No,
on up and
go for
out?
it.
Some of the other principles are, these are in 1937, keep in mind. Clients come before McKinsey's interests, putting what's best for the client before what's best for McKinsey's revenue. No discussing clients. Tell the truth, even if it means challenging clients' opinions. Only perform work that is both necessary and that McKinsey can do well. How far we've strayed.
Yeah, seriously. This was kind of a fun trick. To establish their eliteness, McKinsey reportedly would publish help wanted ads in newspapers with the goal of generating applications that they could then reject.
Good to note.
Pretty good idea.
As
somebody who's been rejected by them, yeah, I mean,
you filled the newspaper ad?
Yeah, I looked at Help Wanted in Binghamton, New York, and there was a huge McKinsey ad.
McKinsey would recruit young and talented and train in-house. He himself was a graduate of Harvard Law and Harvard Business School, and he set looking off for fresh graduates to fill McKinsey's ranks. He, quote unquote, didn't want consultants offering advice filtered through their prior business experience. So let's keep them young and dumb. Because we would like to have a chance to brainwash you before you make any recommendations to our clients. And it was a good thing that they were about to brainwash their lieutenants, because McKinsey was about to systematically dismantle the American middle class in favor of a new class of super rich celebrity CEOs, and it all started in Detroit in the 1950s.
Really some like 1950s music.
This is known as the Treaty of Detroit. In an agreement or a negotiations between United Auto Workers, which is the labor union making the GM cars and the Ford cars, and the bosses at those firms. It's really a zenith for American labor. At this point, workers had negotiated job stability through solidarity. At GM, for example, in return for their promise not to strike, they gained health insurance, pension plans, and cost of living adjustments. And during this time, we've talked about this, I think, in the Jack Welch episode and many others, we had a pretty strong social contract in place at corporations that, you know, you're loyal to your company, you work your way up. There's a story of a mailroom to the corner office. Like, this is a real thing. The agreement between workers and employers ends up being short-lived, because on the other side of the bargaining table sat these CEOs. And at this time, trigger warning, by the way, for if you're a billionaire, okay, they were only making 20 times the salary of the average worker.
It's outrageous.
It is. It is embarrassing.
Here's the inflection in our voice.
And they started to think, wait a second, are we underpaid too? And so GM hired McKinsey to undertake a study led by a consultant by the name of Arch Patton. They asked him to study executive compensation at 40 different companies, and they were appalled by the results. At the time, worker wages were rising faster than those of executives. Dun, dun, dun. The study would have far-reaching implications, and it was basically like the genesis for a lot of the wealth inequality that we have in America today, because armed with that study, CEOs would justify their ever-increasing pay. Because, by the way, before then, the pay wasn't public. You would have no idea how much a CEO at Ford made versus a CEO at GM. So now there's this study where it shows, like, this is what the CEOs makes, and the birth of the CEO dick measuring contest.
And this was pre-Milton Friedman and all that?
Yeah, he wouldn't come in until the 70s. This is the 50s. So executives at railroads, public utilities, and banks were dismayed to learn that they were paid less than those in the automotive, textile, and steel industries. Executives wanted more income simply for bragging rights. Nobody wanted to be near the bottom, and the race to the top had begun.
Who's going to pay my second wife?
That's right.
Someone's got to pay them.
Yeah,
though, obviously.
So how do you guys think McKinsey said, okay, you need to justify this to your shareholders and your employees? Like, how are you CEOs going to justify your growing pay packages, which by 1980, by the way, had doubled to 42 times the average employee salary, which now seems almost pauperous.
Take us back, you know?
So the way that they did that, by linking pay to profits and stock price. The higher the stock price, the higher the pay. And this is kind of the birth of our celebrity CEOs. So now, equipped with support from Ronald Reagan, and as you mentioned, Milton Friedman, billionaire's best friend, companies could take aim at the middle class, whose, again, this is a quote from this When McKinsey Comes to Town book, whose wages were weighing down the bottom line. If you were going to put your most basic self and just only use your smooth brains, what would you say is the most easiest way to increase profits and stock price? Lay
them off, baby. Get out of here.
Who needs to boost revenue by, creating products, innovating? Boring. So there's this wonderful article by Daniel Markowitz at The Atlantic about, it's called How McKinsey Destroyed the Middle Class. And he talks about how companies that had long affirmed an express no layoff policy now took aim at what the corporate raider Carl Icahn, writing in the New York Times in the late 1980s, called the corporate bureaucracies run by incompetent and inbred middle managers.
Yeah, I love inbred. Inbred comment.
So disrespectful.
It's really just, it's really
Isn't it from 0 to 60.
Literally. They downsized in response not to particular business problems, but rather to a new managerial ethos and methods. They downsized when profitable as well as when struggling and during booms and busts. And the impact, again, we've talked about this multiple times, but the destabilizing impact that these new, freewheeling layoffs had on the American middle class cannot be understated. When IBM abandoned lifetime employment in the 1990s, local officials in Binghamton asked gun shop owners around its headquarters to close their stores while employees absorbed the shock.
Wow.
Yeah. So This is from the book you read, Adam, The Firm. There is a distinct possibility that McKinsey may be the single greatest legitimizer of mass layoffs that anyone, anywhere, at any time in modern history. Truly the Genghis Khan of layoffs.
Someone had to do it,
It's so funny because it's like they think that they are just so
genius, savants,
creative, and it's like
peering into the crystal ball and telling people to leave, dude, kick rocks.
But here's the thing, the company's too chicken shit to pull the trigger, so McKinsey comes in and is the bad guy. And if McKinsey's going to collect some fees to be the bad guy, so be it. There's a need. They're just filling the need. That's in Duff McDonald's book, The Firm, he talks a little bit about that, and it makes a lot of sense. The company doesn't want to be the bad guy ultimately. Yeah. But McKinsey will be be the bad guy.
Yeah, because you don't know who they are. They all signed NDOs. Did I work for this company or not? I don't know.
Yeah, they can do the Spider-Man meme pointing at each other.
Yeah.
Or the Oppenheimer, if you will. Who's actually more egregious, the person that built it or the person that used the bomb, So
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm topical. I'm keeping on top.
Well, it won't be topical by the time this comes out. Everyone thinks you'll just have seen Oppenheimer. Dude, it's October.
Yeah. Fair. That's more authentic to who I am than being current. So this is very interesting, this next piece. Mike, can you go to the next slide? You're going to see a bunch of McKinsey inspired layoffs. Trendsetters.
Yeah, trendsetters. So here's the thing. McKinsey's focus on relentless layoffs basically meant that this funnel, remember all these companies that you're seeing, Boeing, McGraw-Hill, Lockheed, GE, Chrysler, these are companies that really depend on long-term employees who understand the ins and outs of the business and the technology that they're creating. When you lay off the numbers that they were laying off, you cut off that funnel of talent that used to exist. And who is going to be executives at any number of these companies? People who had worked their way up through the ranks of the companies and were ready to manage, they had been eliminated. And there's this really funny quote from Carl Petchman. He's the director of the National Regulatory Research Institute, and he talks about a time when a McKinsey consultant came to him. I'll never forget when a young punk from McKinsey came into my office at the New York Public Service Commission and enthusiastically explained how they were right-sizing one of the state's utilities that was in financial trouble. I said, "You mean lay people off?" He responded that they were not laying people off, but right-sizing. I told him, I hope he had the pleasure of being right-sized. Bottom line, these morons right-sized linemen with institutional memory, where the lines actually were.
That was pretty good.
Yeah,
and so they got rid of thank you. They got rid of the folks with the institutional memory and told them, hey, you don't need all those normies, all those lay people to be at your company anyway. You need modern, shiny executives. One from, I don't know, elite colleges with MBAs, ones that, I don't know, have worked for McKinsey. You should hire us. In other words, the strategies that McKinsey implemented created demand for a service they also helped supply.
What a finesse. Hey, break up with your boy. Oh, also you broke up with somebody? Well, I'm single.
The true Ariana Grande of the business world. Break up with your boyfriend. I'm bored.
I am bored.
Absolutely.
Maybe she was a McKinsey consultant as well. Explains her success.
So here's a quote. Management consulting business journalist Walter Keuchel observed, acquired its power and authority not from silver-haired industry experience, but rather from the brilliance of the ideas and the obvious intensity of the people explaining them, even if those people were 28-year-olds. Harsh. But it's true. I mean, how many times have you interacted with consultants at a happy hour or whatever, and you just look at them in the eye and you're like, you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about? And there's another interesting thing that happens, because the only thing that binds these business people isn't their long experience on the factory floor working their way up at Ford, but it's just the general idea of management as a theory. Here's a quote. When management consulting untethers executives from particular industries or firms, like that one guy who moved from working at a prison to working at Louboutin, the only thing he has is management experience, right? And ties them to management in general. It also led them to embrace the one thing common to all corporations, making money for shareholders. Executives raised on this new untethered model of management aim exclusively and directly at profit. Their education, their career arc, and their professional role conspire to isolate them from other workers and train them single-mindedly on the bottom line. The only people that McKinsey really could even relate to were the CEOs that hired them. They hired them in particular, in this story as compensation consultants. So this came out of that initial study that McKinsey did in the 1950s. So this was at a congressional hearing in 2007. The panel reported that almost half of the nation's 250 biggest public corporations had used compensation consultants with conflicts of interest. Those with the biggest conflicts tended to pay their CEOs more. CEOs just don't get salaries anymore. They get stock options, deferred compensation, executive stock plans, lucrative severance package, and a vast array of perks from corporate jets to tax and financial planning services and country club memberships.
As they deserve.
Right, because of the stock price.
Yeah.
They earned it.
Did you have something you wanted to talk about?
Maybe not yet.
Okay.
I think that I think that what would be interesting is on one of these pages he talks about the quality, skills, and knowledge of an outstanding McKinsey consultant.
Ooh.
And it very much tees up, without actually saying it, the archetypical like CEO or like the consultant, and in varying degrees of how problematic or how much you might agree or disagree. Like I'll just give you an outline, like the basic foundations, the non-negotiables being character, personableness, personality, mental equipment, ambition, personal, like how do you begin to quantify, measure for some of this? But, I think that one excerpt, but I don't know where this goes in terms of the thing. It's like the outstanding consultant has to have a good appearance that makes for a favorable personal impression on most people in his own culture. And I thought this was interesting, and is not seriously handicapped in any culture, which is,
No wonder why that book's...
Yeah, seriously.
So
basically it's saying you need to be a clean-cut white man.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Think about CEO. I mean, it basically outlines without trying to explicitly say what we think of as a current
that
CEO.
aged like milk.
Yeah, seriously, worse than milk. So here's Arch Patton. This is the guy who created that compensation study. He's like the archetype of these massive CEOs' salaries. I know it's a terrible, terrible picture, but you can see his original study. It's called Men, Money, and Motivation by Arch Patton.
Also, speaking of which, I do remember a quote in here that Martin Bauer said, men, and then asterisk, and in the footnote, he's like, remember, men also includes women. And I was like, I kid you not.
I'm sure the editor put that in. Yeah. So McKinsey continues their work as the reverse Robin Hood, stealing from workers and giving to executives unchecked for decades. And they're providing cover for these management practices that destabilize the American economy, while the CEO to worker pay ratio grew It's 2021. Do you guys know what it is these days?
It's like 250 or something like
It's
that.
400 to 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. A study by the Federal Reserve documented that over the last 4 decades, the rising market power of corporations contributed to some of society's most intractable problems. McKinsey rarely, this is crazy. McKinsey rarely apologizes for past mistakes, but it seems appropriate to look back at Arch Patton, who started the march towards higher executive compensation. Later in life, when he was asked by a reporter how he felt about the impact of his work, his one word reply, guilty. He said that managers had badly abused his survey and that this resulted largely from management assuming that all of its executives were above average performers.
Real.
I mean, how many fucking dumbasses do we have? I mean, I just did a TikTok the other day about the CEO of Uber, Derek Khosrowshahi. Somebody asked him, how much do you think an Uber cost 3 miles in New York City? And he said $20. The actual price was $50. He has no idea how much his services cost.
How much could a banana cost?
Exactly.
Like $7?
How many CEOs have we talked about? John Foley has no idea how much a Peloton should cost. Like the most basic things that a CEO, and we cannot even wrap our minds around the fact that CEOs might not be performing at the level that they should be. And if they are performing not at that level, they should be given golden parachutes and
We also think CEOs are working all the time 24/7, right?
Yeah.
Do we actually think that's the reality?
No. None of these guys could, so about that CEO, Derek Khosrowshahi, after 6 years as the CEO of Uber, he finally got behind the wheel of an Uber and did a couple rides. And he said the worst part about it was the app, which, first of all, I was like, to use a Barbie quote, your job is app. Like, you can't fucking figure that out because your not your employees, I definitely shouldn't say that, your laborers provide the labor, the materials, all the other stuff. The stories of these guys and gals who are riding Uber are heartbreaking. They've got diabetes, they've got all these back problems, they are living on the fringes of society, and you have the CEO being like, well, I tried it. It was fine. And the app was kind of shitty.
6 years into the
6
role.
years.
Unbelievable.
And he has no idea. I mean, it's crazy. So anyway, you ready to move on to the next piece of corporate gossip?
I don't work. I make decisions.
Yeah.
I'm ideas guy.
Right. Right. So he doesn't work. He doesn't sit for 8 hours and drive.
I mean, it would cloud his decision making if he got into the weeds, the emotionality of all of it. He has to see his numbers on a screen.
He's not a weeds guy.
They asked him, they said, why did it take so long? He was like, I was just really busy with, I'm sure, as fucking Cipriani's.
Casa Cipriani, not Ketch.
Oh,
Casa Cipriani.
Again,
It's
these are not
2012.
going to age appropriately because we're releasing this a couple months from now. Okay. You ready to move on to the next piece of corporate gossip?
Yeah, I gotta go to the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
Rock
Let's take a break and we'll be back. All right, time for our next piece of corporate gossip. The first one is McKinsey. Our consultants are happy to provide clean pee for your patients who are addicted to heroin. So I think we're all pretty much aware of the opioid crisis and the main players, including Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, who are currently in the middle, or they just settled, although there's some appeals, of a massive bankruptcy settlement, and Purdue Pharma doesn't exist anymore. But just some quick background in terms of the opioid crisis and where McKinsey got involved, we were talking about OxyContin, which is a Purdue Pharma product. It hit the stores in 1996, and because the drug could continuously treat severe pain, patients were now able to sleep through the night with, their words, low risk of addiction. Both claims were soon to be revealed to be overstated or false. Eventually, people developed a tolerance and began to kind of chase this chemical high, turning to heroin and fentanyl. You read that book, right? Big Pain?
Yes, I watched Dope Sick with Michael Keaton, who's also from upstate New York. And then I watched Crime of the Century, which is an HBO documentary, like 6-part documentary about Purdue Pharma, Sackler family.
Yeah, both very good if you want to do a deep dive.
Very good. Dope Sick could be triggering.
Yes, yeah.
Both could
I'd
be
say
triggering.
actually this whole section could
Not
be
quite
triggering.
the lightest viewing.
Yes.
I would
So they're getting into heroin and fentanyl. Meanwhile, McKinsey wasn't involved with the pharmaceutical companies yet. but they certainly had their eyes on them, and they wrote a thought piece. So a lot of times McKinsey will write a thought piece and say, here's our opinion on this specific topic. It's called a white paper. And they'll use that to get in front of CEOs and say, hey, we, have a thought price. Just thought they call it a fishing expedition. I just thought we could talk about it and we could share our views and see where we can help your company. Specifically, this thought piece was around how these pharmaceutical companies could better incentivize their sales reps. At the time, these sales reps would just be bopping around to different doctors' offices in what McKinsey called the pinball wizard sales model. And McKinsey wrote that drug companies could fix the problem by doing a better job at analyzing prescription data. You could target physicians who are most likely to prescribe more of a given drug over time, no matter how much or how little they prescribe at the moment. And eventually, these strategies would catch on with the companies that they ended up working with, including Purdue Pharma. Eventually, opioids would ravage American families, killing 80,000 people in 2021 alone. And there's a lot of blame to go around here. The FDA didn't conduct a proper review in the first place. Drug makers are hosting all these expensive paid training conferences at tropical resorts. And there's also this pain movement that no one should ever feel pain at all. And it makes doctors feel like they were undertreating pain.
Yeah, I think many of our listeners, young listeners, had their teeth removed at some age, and you were prescribed 30 Oxycontin for not even something that Advil would have sufficed.
Yeah.
At this point, patients, victims, journalists, doctors are becoming skeptical of opioids and the companies pushing them. And these companies like Purdue Pharma, J&J, had contracted with McKinsey to protect their sales. This is war, they say. McKinsey began viewing those who challenged Purdue as the enemy. You guys are just trying to hurt patients. Now there's going to be patients who are in pain because you guys are being such wusses about opioids. And attempts to curb the epidemic had gone too far, the firm said, making it difficult for patients who truly needed pain relief. It was time, their words, to turbocharge Purdue's sales engine. And this was after reports had come out about physicians who are basically becoming drug dealers. One in the book that I read was seeing 120 patients a day, prescribing Oxy to 1,700 patients a month. And when patients didn't have cash, he'd trade them their prescriptions for guns.
That was like a Florida thing where Florida basically had these pill farms.
Yeah.
Where people would just come in and they would travel from West Virginia to get pills because Florida had lax rules, right? And those are all very, very crazy stories.
I think one of the litmus tests if you're getting into dealer behavior is if you start trading cash alternatives for the thing.
That should be a red flag for you as a prescriber.
Minimum a yellow flag,
So McKinsey was writing in their papers to Purdue, they're saying, we recommend you take action to turbocharge Purdue's sales engine and optimize across all elements of the winning sales model, from targeting to territories to incentive compensation. The firm invoked words from the Vietnam War, stressing importance of winning the hearts and minds of the sales force and permanently changing how the company operates. And I love all these finance guys and consulting people who love war metaphors, but they'd be the first in line at the doctor's office to get a note for bone spurs.
Honestly saying, but this means war, Also the changing hearts and minds, as if they're talking about the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Talking about world peace or ending child starvation.
Purdue later rebranded its turbocharge campaign, realizing it might not sit well with families that lost children to opioids. New name, Evolve to Excellence.
Brain drugs.
Cool. This is the most insane part of the story. In 2017, this is not that long ago, McKinsey made a suggestion that Purdue should consider giving distributors a rebate for every OxyContin overdose attributable to the pills they sold. So if CVS filled a prescription for opioids and there was an event, in their words, meaning the person that picked up those pills died, Purdue would pay CVS $14,810.
What's that look like on the CVS P&L?
Yes. You know what's fucked up? CVS was one of McKinsey's biggest clients.
Unbelievable.
McKinsey's defense, Purdue never implemented the ideas.
It was just an idea.
Oh
Yeah,
my
it's just
God.
an idea. It's only an idea if
was
it's a bad
written
thing.
on
spitballing.
paper and
On a slide.
on a slide and recommended. Mm-hmm. But it was just an idea.
So the documents uncovered during discovery, because obviously, ultimately, this leads to a massive lawsuit. A McKinsey partner, like in kind of a post-mortem, she says, Purdue was facing an unstable and challenging situation. Fortunately for the drug company, McKinsey came to the rescue. Through a series of efforts, we secured the future of the crucial OxyContin franchise.
Hooray.
It's giving like Spider-Man, whatever
The
that.
multiverse.
Yeah.
It does feel like now for the whole family, it has like that kind of energy to it.
Yeah. So in Discovery, like I was saying, there's just tons of funny slides. Mike, the next couple slides actually go in order. And you never get to see these like in real life. Like they're only available to us because of the discovery in these lawsuits. So this is McKinsey talking about a really great opportunity Purdue has to target not the people who are taking opioids, but the people with opioid addiction. And we can address them by potentially supplying them with Suboxone, which is a pill that helps people with opioid addiction. And it's just so funny to me. It's like, why do you want to make money off people who are getting addicted to OxyContin? So we can make money off of getting them unaddicted.
All smart people make the problem and then make the solution for the problem. Win-win.
So insane. This is McKinsey's. They sent out an email to all the people in the firm, like Fun Run for the Cure, Shatterproof, Rise Up Against Addiction 5K. Come end stigma with us. Did you know 1 in 3 people know someone addicted to opioids? A McKinsey-sponsored Race for the Cure.
Oh my God.
I'll tell you what, they have is the audacity. Mm-hmm. Go to the next one. Okay, this is great. So there was a Lake Placid Pharma Boys offsite, my name. Basically, McKinsey brought Purdue to Lake Placid, the Lake Placid Lodge, to do like a big offsite with all the executives. And they have the agenda in the discovery materials. And one of them is a role play module, which you could totally see having, in our experience doing management consultant, I could totally see that doing this. Participants assume the role of an innovative company like Google, Disney, Apple. Brainstorm how this company would think about entering the opioid market.
I missed that when I did the pre-read. Wow.
Whoa. Dude,
it would be OxyContin.
Do you want to hear something real quick?
Yeah.
That in 2014, Purdue explored the idea of opening rehab facilities in a court filing in Massachusetts. It was revealed.
Yeah.
Did you talk about that?
We didn't talk about that, but yeah, that's McKinsey's
Yeah.
idea. They say it was Purdue who was exploring it, but that was McKinsey
course.
ideas. We have the paper. So this is part 2 of the Farmer Boys offsite. This is their agenda. Just some things I want to point out. They had to do group fitness together, kickboxing, and a run around Mirror Lake. They had cocktails and a team dinner with surprise guests.
Who's surprise guest?
Meg Thee Stallion. Yeah.
that's how she got her start.
Yeah. So a couple of other things that I think are really funny from the agenda. Visioning exercise. How do you want Purdue to be described in 10 years?
Oh, if they only
Defunct.
Criminally liable. Yeah. Isn't that so funny? Like the normalization of crime in this capacity is so funny to me.
This is like, getting into the, evil isn't just like a bunch of people in like, the little robber mask and tiptoeing around with bags. It's like they just wear blue polo shirts.
Well, what's so funny is like people talk about lizard people or whatever, people who control things behind the scenes. It's like, guys, they're right here at the Lake Placid Club going for a ride. Kickboxing. So the interesting twist is while McKinsey was consulting for Purdue up in Lake Placid, they were also consulting for the FDA at the same time. A review by the New York Times finds tens of thousands of internal McKinsey documents that the firm had repeatedly allowed employees who served the pharmaceutical companies, including opioid makers, to also consult for the FDA. Since 2010, at least 22 McKinsey consultants have worked for both Purdue and the FDA, some at the same time, The firm provided no evidence to the committee that it has disclosed the potential conflicts of interest as required under federal contracting rules, an apparent violation, the report says. So there is this new bill that was just passed earlier this year to rein in conflicts of interest for consultants. It's called the Preventing Organizational Conflicts of Interest in Federal Acquisition Act. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some changes because of this. And of course, we know, the fallout from this from the Purdue side was pretty significant. Purdue doesn't exist anymore. The Sacklers had to pay a number of $1 billion. I don't have the figure off the top of my head. They are not at the moment criminally liable, though I know in the bank there was some appeal of the bankruptcy that might hold them criminally liable in the future.
Yeah, we do have one retraction.
Okay.
Michael Keaton's from Chiropolis, outside of Pittsburgh, not New York, upstate New York. His brother worked in upstate New York. I got that confused.
Okay. Don't worry about it. Hey, don't beat yourself up.
Well, I know people are going to get on me about that. Somebody from Pittsburgh, so.
Good. Are you ready for the next piece of corporate gossip?
Spill.
We're moving to Enron. Enron is basically a McKinsey spinoff in which Jeff Skilling visits Ken Lay at the summer house in Montauk. Mike, can you go to the next page? Oh, what do we have here? This is...
Oh my God.
Deep fake.
This is a deep fake. We have the original image is Lauren Workus and Sheena Shea, in which we know that there was a spin-off of Vanderpump Rules. Summer House spun off of Vanderpump Rules. And in this case, Jeff Skilling is Lauren Workus representing the Summer House franchise.
Tribe.
And then we have Sheena Shea is Ken Lay. In a similar way, Enron, in a sense, kind of spun out from McKinsey.
It's a stretch.
Yeah. Huge stretch. Also, the Venn diagram on this reference of people who would understand.
Oh, that's our market.
Let's go.
That's our target market. So we know from our Enron episode that Jeff Skilling, aka the architect of the Enron collapse, aka Jack Taylor, got his start as a McKinsey consultant for Enron. And remember, in the years before the scandal broke, everything was coming up Enron, and McKinsey was there for the ride. These are quotes from, again, this McKinsey Comes to Town book. McKinsey consultants burrowed into the company like armies of carpenter ants, staying weeks, sometimes months. As Enron's stock kept rising, so too did the number of favorable articles, often written by McKinsey consultants who did not disclose to their readers that the firm was pulling in tens of millions of dollars from the company they were praising. As the McKinsey Quarterly explained, Enron became a world leader in private power generation because it saw that profit did not depend on construction and operation skills, but on deal structuring and risk allocation. And I love this quote too, because it's like, if you take away the consultant speak, they're basically saying that profit you can actually get from fraud. Like, you don't have to actually do the boring stuff, While McKinsey was never implicated in Enron's illegal activity, many inside the firm and outside wondered why such smart people could not grasp the danger of becoming so deeply involved in a company that had difficulty explaining how it earned money. Duff McDonald wrote in The Firm, McKinsey didn't just cash the checks. It fully believed in the call and helped spread the gospel. McKinsey consultants were in the room when Andy Fastow was pitching those private partnerships that ultimately took the firm down. They wrote in this McKinsey Quarterly, its deployment of off-balance sheet funds using institutional investment money fostered its securitization skills and granted access to capital at below the hurdle rates of major oil companies. All that to say, they fucking knew.
But we know that one of McKinsey's guiding principles is don't talk about clients' affairs, right? And at this point, McKinsey had been a part of some pretty big failures that they didn't necessarily want to come to light. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a sidebar here and talk a little bit about those failures. The point I'm trying to make is that McKinsey is risking that maybe the guidance that they're giving is not great. So they famously consulted with AT&T, telling them that cell phones were a niche market. They would only do about 900,000 cell phones in the year 2000. We know that was quite a few $100 million off. They helped and approved the $350 billion Time Warner Cable AOL merger, which is like viewed as one of the worst mergers.
I actually want to do an episode on that alone.
Okay.
Like, that was such a clusterfuck. It was so embarrassing for everybody.
And then in 1990, they advised Swissair on a controversial Hunter strategy.
What's that?
Major expansion program failed miserably, and the airline was forced to declare bankruptcy in 2001. So on the heels of all this that happened kind of in the 2000s. McKinsey's also dealing with Enron. They weren't really in a place to say, hey, yeah, we made another big fuck up here. And it was Enron.
And basically, I mean, when Enron collapsed, nothing really happened to McKinsey. They kept that pretty well under wraps. I mean, you know, obviously you've got some documentation here, but like they said, we didn't do the fraud. We consulted for a company that did the fraud.
Which we would never advise our future clients to.
Other than the times that we did a couple times, but it's not even like that many. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next piece of corporate gossip?
Yes, please.
All right, piece of corporate gossip number 5. If you can go to the next slide. If you're looking for the lizard people controlling the American economy, it's not the West Coast elites. It's McKinsey. And so this is kind of some criticism of where McKinsey finds themselves today. So there's like this cyclical nature of consultants. They kind of go out of favor during a financial crisis. Like these crises are often engineered by the companies that they consult for, and then they come back to favor in a few years later. And right now we're definitely in a downswing. And if there's one person you should listen to who turned against McKinsey, it's Marvin Bower, the guy who literally wrote this book. Before he died in 2003, according to Duff McDonald's book, he told a friend that the firm had become greedy fucks. There's this new book out. It literally just came out. It's called The Big Con: How Consulting Industry Weakens Our Businesses, Infantilizes Our Governments, and Warps Our Economies. And here's some quotes that I found. They say, consultants are a combination of con men and vampire squids. They're con men because they exploit their victims' illusions. They play on people's greeds and desperation by pretending that they can enable companies to transform your business and do more with less. They also routinely offer lowball deals so they can get their feet in the door. But once inside, they transform themselves into vampire squids and set about sucking the lifeblood out of their victims. The ideal consulting engagement from the consultant's point of view is one that leaves the client permanently dependent on the consultant. With its internal capabilities diminished, it needs to keep employing outside help. So once the layoffs happen, you can't do what you were going to do without us. Its appetite for transformation whetted. It remains on the lookout for the next big idea, calling in yet more consultants to solve problems that the previous collections of consultants created in the first place. And I think the fact that these consultants suck the life out of these companies is one thing, but there's something else going on that, in my opinion, is even more parasitic.
You know, this isn't like a new idea. You remember Office Space?
I do.
And the whole concept is the consultants come in and they ruin the company, and the one guy's like freaking out. I forgot what his character name is, but it's like the same thing. Same story every time, right? Cut costs, offshore. What is it? Fold?
Old F.
Old F.
Dolph.
Which is like, they made a movie about that in 1997.
I know.
And we're talking about it 25, 26 years later, and it's the same stuff over and over again. Nothing's changed.
How do they keep getting hired? I mean, that's like a stupid question.
Because when you say you're working with McKinsey, people love it.
It gives you clout. It gives you all your decisions as a CEO have the rubber stamp of approval. So think about it this way. Just like us, CEOs deal with imposter syndrome. But unlike us, they have the resources to hire a blue chip firm to come in and say, you actually are smart. You are doing the right thing. Here you go. All you have to do is listen to us, do a PowerPoint slide and say, yes, no. No, you don't have to come up with anything on your own. All you have to do is listen to us.
Outsourced intelligence.
Seriously. And it's not even intelligence. So here's what's really fucked up. This is something that's even more parasitic that's going on, in my opinion. Will you go to the next slide? At the moment, right now, McKinsey has, and is one of the only firms that does this, a hedge fund that it uses to invest in the companies it consults for. It's called MIO. This money that's in this fund is McKinsey's 401k money. It's as opaque as its parent company. They say that MIO, McKinsey Investment Offices, and McKinsey employ separate staffs. MIO staff has no non-public knowledge of McKinsey clients. For the vast majority of assets under management, decisions about specific investments are made by third-party managers. I'm sorry, but this does not pass the sniff test, and I'll tell you why. Internal documents examined by the Times showed that from 2000 to 2010, MIO's fund had an average annual return above 9% compared with 1.6% loss in the S&P 500. In 2008, when the broader U.S. stock market fell more than 36%, this fund lost about half that amount. That does not pass the sniff test. If you have a fund that's doing that much better than the other fund, you have non-public information. I'm sorry, in my opinion. Adam, you have a note here about $4 billion sitting in an offshore.
Yeah. So I read this article that you provide, and it mentioned something about $4 billion sitting in Barfield Nominees, which is a holding company that sits in the English Channel on some island. And you know, anytime there's offshore money, anytime you have offshore in a business thing, it's not a good sign.
No.
So it's just, you know, this place is notorious for shady financial activities, and for McKinsey's hedge fund to be there, to be doing business there, feels like a giant red flag.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic. And something that's kind of an undercurrent of everything we've been talking about is the fact that these companies can exist because they are so homogenous. It's very much a group of people who grew up in the same way. They all went to private boarding schools, then they go to Harvard, then they go to McKinsey, then they become executives at this company. And so the undercurrent of this entire story is the fact that there is zero diversity, and it's only getting worse with the recent overturning of affirmative action. So this brings us into our last piece of corporate gossip. Clarence Thomas really went, guys, no, it would make McKinsey better if they had access to more white men. Hey, white men who can take me on yachts. Right now, we have the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action. And affirmative action has a corporate cousin called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, aka DEI. And earlier this year, in an amicus brief, 13 Republican state attorneys general sent a letter to Fortune 100 companies writing that their DEI efforts might be illegal now. And now, DEI executives from Netflix, Disney, Warner Brothers have all been let go. Conservatives hate DEI almost as much as they hate ESG and Bud Light. Mike, can you go to the next? Almost 70 employers, including GE, Google, JetBlue, warned in a brief to the court that without affirmative action, they would lose access to a pipeline of highly qualified future workers. And meanwhile, employment data from a company called Live Data Technologies shows that chief diversity officers have been more vulnerable to layoffs than their human resources counterparts, experiencing 40% higher turnover, and their job searches are taking longer.
Unreal.
And on top of that, folks who are able to get into these schools will be in an even less diverse place. So if you do get into Harvard, it's going to be much whiter. And I worry about, these firms have come out and said, this is going to be a lot more difficult for us to find folks from these Ivy League schools that we want to put in our executive ranks.
You know, lest we all sound like McKinsey haters, I feel like at some point we should go around and say
one nice thing.
One nice thing.
We've
about
never
Mr.
done that in the history of our podcast.
but you know, we might sound. One might say, you know, you have to say just something to consider.
Well, let's do the takeaways. Let's do the takeaways, and maybe by the time we're done with our takeaways, we can find one nice thing. So McKinsey operates in a really weird loophole. In my opinion, like looking at all the data that we looked at today, it's a private company that controls a massive amount of public companies and public interests. And it feels like there should be some controls. Like I should be able to know how much of my tax dollars go to McKinsey. And if McKinsey is operating as a public benefit, then I should be able to go to those board meetings.
That's very valid.
Okay, in terms of something good about them, I think it is pretty impressive to be a firm that is over 100 years old. I think that is a very, very small group of people. So good for them, I guess.
Which, again, I think that shout out to Marvin Bauer. If you look at no one's intentions are ever to be very few outright corrupt. And it sounds like he is very aware of the greedy fucks that have taken over his baby.
But isn't that fucked up though? It takes them until the end of their life, Arch Patton and Marvin Bauer, to be like, oh, I feel bad about what I did and you guys really fucked it up. Like, then do something about it.
Do something about it. And also, you should have seen the signs.
Yeah.
Very rarely is it like, oh my God, like,
what happened?
This totally blindsided me. This person that I felt sketched out about did something sketchy.
I can't believe it.
I can't believe
There was something that McKinsey came up with. I'm trying to look it up right now. that actually added value to society. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to find it. It was something. It was something in the government. They like something. They came up with something.
I know what you're talking about. The 5K run for the cure.
They really raised a lot of awareness.
Yeah, they did raise a lot of awareness for addiction.
Oh God, there was something great. I mean, it's just so funny because like James McKinsey is like the antithesis of you. Like he loved accounting so much. He created like a program to, guide businesses on numbers just based on accounting. And that is so not you, right? You hated accounting, and like he was just a tactician.
I love that.
Came up with it and like was like, I'm gonna help companies guide them through just the numbers based off their balance sheets and come up with efficiencies that can be proven, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think James McKinsey's initial idea of this firm to provide subject matter experts on things that businesses actually needed help understanding is a good idea.
Very boots on the ground understanding. And like his thing was accounting.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading in the few chapters that I read, Marvin Bauer was like, bro, chill with accounting. Like,
oh my God, shut the fuck up.
You gotta relax. But like, I think that even he carried over the, like, you have to have a subject matter expertise, which is very valid. Like very practiced on the ground expertise as opposed to just quote unquote general management.
Management, exactly. Now their only expertise is just management and layoffs, downshoring, downsizing, offshoring, and fraud.
The Dolph.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, no. So I've given up on trying to find a good thing about it.
I have a takeaway.
Okay.
I should have gone to a better school. Then I could have just been crushing it at McKinsey and been rich, and who cares?
Yeah. Oh, so you would be willing to give up your morals?
Oh, what morals?
What
for a
right
jet?
price?
What are we talking about here? These guys seem
Super
to
yachts?
we are mad. We could yell at them all we want, but they're still like, okay, cool, yell at me while I'm all the way up in the sky.
Oh, my morals.
100%.
Exactly, yeah.
They have a price too.
Yeah.
Well, I think McKinsey is probably subsidizing steak prices in the Midwest, like they're with the steak dinners that they're purchasing.
Oh, for sure.
And things like that. That's probably good. They're keeping a lot of restaurants in business. Well, high restaurants in business. So I support that. The thing I have for you guys is having experience in management consulting. Like I think out of this is what a listener would be confused about is, are we anti-management consulting or just anti-McKinsey?
I kind of think that I have become anti-management consulting. I think, like we were talking about earlier, I think there's totally room for like small niche firms who like specialize in something that a business wouldn't understand otherwise. But the idea that you could be an expert in management is basically a lie that's created to build wealth for a certain group of people, in my opinion.
Similarly, I have less experience in management consulting than you do, but it always seemed very strange to me that you can be out of practice and still claim to be an expert in whatever the thing is that you're consulting. Like especially in the world of tech, everything evolves so much that my hot take is you should probably only be able to be a consultant for some finite amount of years before you have to go back into the business.
That's a really good point.
Like get your hands dirty. Like, why are you still consulting, not doing the work? Like James McKinsey said it. Like, making business decisions is hard. Like, make them do the hard work.
He literally he goes, guys, this is hard.
This is really hard. Like, it's easier to just tell people what to do than it is to do the thing. And I think that more anti-McKinsey than management consultants. But.
And we think that there's probably some ethics training required for most of our management consultants out there. No. Okay. Good. Sounds great.
And if it is, it's like, hey guys, don't murder, as we said before. Right? Don't talk to murderers.
At a bare minimum, our firm should not take away from the population.
Yeah.
Directly.
Unless they have a very, very big budget and they seem apologetic.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see if like some publication could come out with like a hit list of who's doing the worst.
What do you mean?
Like management consulting groups that are doing the worst.
Oh, the worst things. Yeah.
Like
involved.
Quantify it.
Quantify
it.
Yeah.
Because
murder metric.
so much of management consulting is not quantifiable.
Well, and that's the thing.
There's no ROI.
They're private companies. All their employees are under NDA. Mm-hmm. This book we're not supposed to have.
Yeah.
The book we don't have.
I mean, we don't have this book.
I don't know how it got here. Or who purchased it.
All right. Are you guys ready to wrap it?
Yeah, let's wrap.
All right. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy to have you here from Texas, and hopefully we'll have you again soon.
Knock on wood. This was a good time. I feel like this is the gossip circle all over again, dude. This is good.
Lawrence was an OG gossiper. I mean, really, Lawrence, that's how we bonded, really, over gossip.
It's one of my most shameful vices in this world, but damn it.
Don't
I'm here doing it.
In the words of that one guy, look in yourself in the mirror and say, I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Which I will do tonight profusely. Ask myself, what did I do here?
Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you want to find out more, you can go to corporategossippod.com. You can find us on TikTok and on Instagram at Corporate Gossip Pod. Don't forget to rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to buy us a coffee, you can also do that too at the link in our show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.